Chris Cuomo is out at CNN. The network fired its 9 p.m. anchor over the weekend, finally giving in to the mostly self-appointed journalistic watchdogs who've been calling for his head for months. What is stunning is that we still don't really know exactly why Chris Cuomo was fired. Now, I'm not here to defend Chris Cuomo. I will, though, speak up for basic standards that ought to apply to everyone, because I don't even really know what the standards are or were that got him canned. To be clear, I only subject myself to attacks for asking these questions. The right has hated Chris for years. The left hates that he helped his brother respond to sexual harassment allegations. And the left-leaning inside the journalism mafia has been calling for his ouster since the day he interviewed his brother on TV. So this is a no-win situation for those of us who just care about cancel culture and how it can or does or should work. Now, I get why the calls for Cuomo's head grew louder last week following the release of text messages and transcripts by New York State Attorney General Letitia James. The messages showed Chris Cuomo to be heavily involved in the defense of his brother, former Governor Andrew Cuomo, against sexual misconduct allegations, more so than he'd initially let on. But what no one points out is that at the time, his brother Andrew was denying the allegations. There was no attorney general or assembly report to refer to. Chris Cuomo was simply relying on his brother's word for what happened and what didn't. But now it seems that it may not have even been those new texts, but an allegation of sexual misconduct against Chris Cuomo himself that apparently pushed CNN over the edge. A yet-to-be-identified former colleague at ABC News came forward apparently last Wednesday through an attorney to inform CNN of her decades-old claims. The attorney was discussing with the network a plan to turn over evidence, but apparently CNN acted before ever seeing that evidence. Remember, this is what the accuser's attorney, Deborah Katz, said on Sunday about her discussions with CNN. She said, on Wednesday, December 1st, 2021, I contacted CNN to report my client's allegations of misconduct against Chris Cuomo. By Friday, I was in discussions with CNN about providing documentary evidence of my client's allegations and making my client available for an interview with CNN's outside counsel. Last night, which was Saturday, CNN acted promptly on my client's complaint and fired Mr. Cuomo. Now, it seems from that like she didn't even turn over the evidence yet. And the woman didn't even speak with CNN's lawyers. CNN just used the accusation from an attorney to end the pressure on them. A CNN spokesperson said this over the weekend: based on the report we received regarding Chris's conduct with his brother's defense, we had cause to terminate. When new allegations came to us this week, we took them seriously and saw no reason to delay taking immediate action. Look, if the sexual misconduct allegation against Chris Cuomo is investigated and holds up, that would obviously be a serious thing, very different story. But the supporting evidence for the allegation hadn't even been handed over. It just got too hot. As CNN's Brian Stelter said, clearly speaking for the network, it was, quote, death by 1,000 cuts, where there were just so many headaches time and again involving Chris Cuomo. But it really appears he was just doomed from the moment the self-righteous and often hypocritical journalism watchdogs determined that Cuomo should not have helped his brother in any way. Look, I never cared about that much. It's his brother. Everyone knows it's his brother. The big issue here for me, putting aside the sexual harassment allegation, had always been transparency and honesty with the audience. Are they lying to you, the viewers? Are they doing something dishonest? I care if Chris Cuomo or anyone else lied while on a major network. And I figured the CNN investigation would focus on his comments in August, where he said this:
I never misled anyone about the information I was delivering or not delivering on this program. I never attacked nor encouraged anyone to attack any woman who came forward. I never made calls to the press about my brother's situation. I never influenced or attempted to control CNN's coverage of my family.
Now, some of the texts raise questions about some of those comments, and I've discussed some of those issues before. But this whole Cuomo episode got me thinking about other journalistic scandals involving current hosts who kept their jobs in the face of controversy and why the journalism mob hasn't come for them too. Like MSNBC's Joy Reid. In the 2000s, on Reid's old blog, she made a series of homophobic statements. Quote, most straight people cringe at the sight of two men kissing. Part of the intrinsic nature of straightness is that the idea of homosexual sex is, well, gross. And does that make me homophobic? Probably. Well, those are just a few examples. And maybe even worse than her comments was her patently absurd cover-up. First, she said she didn't remember writing those posts. Then she made a bizarre claim that she was hacked, and through her lawyer claimed the FBI was investigating. She asked lawyers to investigate if her blog or its archives might have been hacked. And NBC claimed to be doing an internal investigation. Shocker. When anyone is followed up with NBC or Reid on this, they get silence. The closest she ever actually got to an apology was heavily qualified mea culpa during her first broadcast after the blog posts were unearthed, where she expressed remorse for, quote, things I deeply regret and am embarrassed by. But she still denied writing the additional blog posts which had been uncovered.
I genuinely do not believe I wrote those hateful things because they are completely alien to me. But I can definitely understand, based on things I have tweeted and have written in the past, why some people don't believe me. I've not been exempt from being dumb or cruel or hurtful to the very people I want to advocate for. I own that. I get it.
I don't believe I wrote those things? She never owned it. Where is the capital J journalist crowd on that one? Look, I am all for second chances. If Joy Reid came out and apologized for both the comments and for lying about the investigation, et cetera, I get it. Brian Williams eventually owned the comments that got him demoted. You know, I invited on this show tonight a prominent media critic named Dan Frumkin, who wrote a column which appeared on NBC's website about why Chris Cuomo needed to be fired. He writes a long, damning piece about this. And then when we asked him to come on to talk about it, he claimed he couldn't come on the show because he hasn't, quote, been nearly immersed in the Cuomo story as a lot of other people. Wouldn't be able to do a deep dive. Wait, what? He did a deep dive, written story, long story, calling for someone to be fired. And now he isn't qualified to discuss it? One of the reasons I wanted to talk to him is that he wrote, quote, only a powerful, privileged white man would have been able to get away with a fraction of what Cuomo has done. Women and people of color routinely get in much bigger trouble for much less. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is that actually true? And by the way, if it's a matter of it being about the sexual misconduct allegations, right, as opposed to the other stuff, remember there was that claim against Tom Brokaw. Former NBC colleague Linda Vester lodged a harassment claim against Brokaw. The former nightly news anchor retained his position at the network. He denied it. Rachel Maddow and other women who work at NBC News came out with a statement of support for Brokaw. That's why it went away. He had a support, a base. Look, I'm glad they kept Brokaw. But this shouldn't in the end be about what you think of Chris Cuomo or what I think about it. I've been clear I consider Chris a friend, as I do many hosts on CNN and Fox and network news. Brokaw was a mentor of mine. This is about the process that led to Chris Cuomo's firing, or perhaps the lack of one. What is the standard to get someone fired, to get canceled? Chris Cuomo is a guy people love to hate, that he's successful, controversial, brash, comes from a big family, and he doesn't have a built-in base to support him now. So no one wants to ask those questions. Well, I shouldn't say no one, because one of the only people who's been asking questions is my guest, Michael Tracey. He's an independent journalist whose work can be found on mtracey.substack.com. He's been covering this, asking some of those tough questions. Michael, thank you for coming on the show. Appreciate it. So are you as confused as I am? I mean, maybe you have a better sense of exactly what was the reason in the end that Chris Cuomo was fired?
Well, when the termination was announced on Saturday, a lot of people apparently wrongly assumed that it was because CNN had this epiphany where they realized that Chris Cuomo's journalistic conduct had been unethical and no longer would it be tolerable for them to keep him on air. But that turned out not to be the case at all. It had nothing to do with his journalistic ethics as such. Now we find out that, according to the LA Times, they say the final straw in keeping Cuomo from being fired at CNN was that he had this new misconduct charge lodged against him by a lawyer, Deborah Katz, who, as you mentioned, had been involved in the Andrew Cuomo saga and represented one of the more, I have to say, dubious accusers in that whole investigation. So, I mean, people are saying that CNN has suddenly, had this revelation where, they're now going to be these paragons of journalistic integrity. But as usual, it's just a PR move where they get an excuse to ditch somebody who had been causing them headaches. And they, in doing so, they kind of besmirch him in the process. And we have no idea if this particular misconduct allegation has been credible. There's been nothing put in the public record that, as far as I know, would allow for the public to ascertain whether this is credible or not. But yet they just get rid of him under, again, dubious circumstances.
But it seems to me that the minute the entire sort of inside the journalism world mob came after him, he was done, right? I mean, this isn't about the viewers. This isn't about sort of judging more broadly. This is about the fact that I think that the heat was just getting to the point where everyone is saying fire him, right? Everyone. You literally, I mean, I would go to parties and I would try and explain why I thought that, and when I say parties, I mean the inside the media parties that I sometimes go to, where there are other media people there, and I become the pariah because I'm trying to explain to people, hey, look, all I'm asking is to apply consistent standards. One of the things I like about you is people can't peg you politically. You'll go after wherever you think that there's hypocrisy. And it just seems to me that the journalism ethics people, weren't judging Chris Cuomo based on sort of the political Chris Cuomo, because they probably align with him on a lot of the politics of it. It's the fact that, they had to claim, and when they did claim that this was some great sin, that the only way to resolve this is to fire him.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've definitely also noticed that there is a suspicious convergence between left and right in terms of how they're at least publicly discussing this issue, because, for better or worse, the Cuomos seem to have little constituency that's willing to support them in a trying time in terms of their ideological position. We can get into the reasons for that, but it's sort of irrelevant because the reason that there was so much heat on Chris Cuomo is because it was just presumed that the allegations he was supposedly helping his brother cover up or whatever, I mean, frankly, his interventions as evidenced by those text messages don't seem all that, extensive. But the heat was so strong and glaring on CNN at this point because everybody just presumed that the allegations were 100% substantiated and credible. Whereas, I mean, you've covered on the show in the past that, the district attorney that's charging or that's presiding over one of the key allegations in Albany went out of his way to say that there was exculpatory material on Andrew Cuomo. That's just one example. We can get into many, but there hasn't been much of a desire to actually look at the substance of these allegations. And so when Chris Cuomo is then involved as somehow helping his brother cover it up, people just assume that it's worthy of heat, even though they've been had a very stark lack of interest in actually scrutinizing these allegations all from the outset.
Well, or going through each one, like, for example, talking about what was this one about the wedding that it was actually being talked about, wasn't someone who actually worked with Andrew Cuomo, et cetera. Anyway, Michael Tracey, we're going to have to continue this another day. Thank you very much for coming on the show. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.